Okay, here we go. So, it turns out I actually have two videos that I want to do today. Um, the reason I got started on this project today is actually a whole confluence of a bunch of things. Mostly being I'm a book hoarder. I feel like I'm a book hoarder. I don't think I'm actually a book hoarder. I don't believe that at all. Um, I do get rid of books, but honestly, I feel like even as a child, I mean, what a great gift. Our mother would take us to the library every single week. But on top of going to the library, we were often gifted books. And I remember moving out of my mother's home and coming back from where I had moved to, and she had packed up my room, and there was boxes of books from my childhood. Like I just never got rid of them. So, I mean, I'm in my 20s and I'm the proud owner of Lovey and the Girls, which was a wonderful, one of my favorite books as a kid. But like, really, do I need that? I have tried to make the effort to cull books occasionally as an adult. I tend to move around a lot. Where I'm living right now is the longest I've lived anywhere. I think this is my fourth year living here. Um, so that's pretty sedentary for me. So usually what would happen though is that when I'm moving, I'll go through books and pull books out. And because I'm not moving, books are coming in, but they're not going out. And it's starting to become pretty overwhelming, especially because I haven't been reading as much in these most recent years as I usually would have. So I find that as books start piling up, like I literally, my bookshelves will be full. So then I start stacking them in corners and stacks in my bedroom. Like it's just, and it starts to get really out of control. And as that happens, I read less and less and less and less. And I think that's because I just start to feel overwhelmed. I start to feel like I'm never going to read these books. I remember reading once somewhere, and I can't remember where, but I remember reading just this line about how when you are buying a book, what you are actually buying is the idea of your future self having time to read this book. And when I read that, I thought, oh, that's so genius because it's true. Ever since I've read that, I've gone back and looked at or thought about that every single time I pick up a book. And I can look at my bookshelf and say, oh, I remember where I thought I was going to read this book. And so many of them are books that I'm like, oh, this would be a great beach read. Well, how many times in a year am I at the beach? Two, maybe three if I'm lucky. I'm not going to read a whole book on that day at the beach either. So, like, how many beach books do I really need? I mean, I think I have enough now, probably to last me the rest of my life. Um, so that's frightening. Which brings me to another thing I read recently. It was really a great article. I'll find it and link to it below. Just about being realistic about how much time you actually have. Well, and I think there's something to be said when you're young, in your teens, in your 20s, you're just experimenting with everything and figuring out what you like and what you don't like and all that kind of stuff. And so that's a wonderful thing. But once you start getting up in years, as I am, you start realizing your time is finite and you don't have that much of it left. And you need to start making wiser choices about where you're spending that time. So, and with that in mind, I was like, oh, I really gotta call, do a curation of my bookshelves again, especially because I have some vacation time coming up for my job that I have to take before a certain deadline. Mm. So I booked vacation for this weekend. Of gonna go do some winter camping, and part of the reason that I had booked this winter camp spot uh, was because it's a 10-minute drive from my very favorite bookstore in the entire province where I live. And I was very excited about that until, I mean, I have my, I have my tent cabin booked, ready to go, and then I checked on the bookstore hours, and it turns out that this bookstore actually closes as of the Canadian Thanksgiving weekend, so it won't be open, which was kind of a heartbreaker for me. But the good news is that there is another bookstore about an hour away in our second largest city. It's also a super rock and awesome bookstore, and the guy there is always looking for books. He's always looking for books. He's always bugging me. What did you bring? So, and he does trade credit or money. Last time I was there, I actually literally had just been at like some fundraiser book sale that you come across quite often at the park where I was staying, and I had paid $1 for a certain medical book. I had read it, then I ended up at his bookstore, and he's like, I paid good money for medical books, and I was like, oh, I have one in my cart. I ended up like getting 100, sorry, not 100, 10 times as much uh, from him for that book as I paid. So I felt like a real treasure hunter that day. Anyway, it worked out really well. So, so what I've decided to do is stop in at that bookstore on my way up to the cabin. So I needed to cull all my books to figure out, uh, well, not to figure out, but I needed to cull all my books to take to him and try and give them to somebody who can make better use of them. So that was my plan. Um, in doing this, I came across a big stack of books that I've actually all that are like I finished those books. So, like I said earlier, a bunch of the well, I'll talk about that in the next video. I'm actually going to make 2 videos. I'm going to keep them kind of separate. So, what I did is I was very inspired by another booktuber. I believe her channel is just called Layla's Books, I think. I'll link to it down below as well. All the references that I make, I'll make a little link. I'm really enjoying her channel. She did a whole series one year of unhauls from, she has a whole closet full of books, apparently. They're super fun to watch. You really should go and watch just because it's just to watch her face when a book comes up and she's like, ah, now I have to read that. So I've actually made a stack for myself of books that I'm also going to do in the same manner that she did. But I think, anyway, I'll just quickly go through, like, there were books on my shelf of things that, like, the Dynasties of China. Well, I mean, now that I've discovered audiobooks, something like this, I would rather listen to in an audiobook one of my long drives than actually spend time reading myself. There's too many other books I want to read. Um, Ann Patchett, read, I think, what did I read? I think it was Belcanto. I did not like it. So I had already bought up a bunch of other Ann Patchett books, realized I'm not that big a fan, and I don't think I'm going to read any of the other ones, so that's going. Um, Orange is the New Black. Where did I leave? I DNF'd that on 130. Page 130. I just couldn't. I wandered off, did something else. Clearly, I'm not going back to this. It's been, I think it's been a year and a half. Um, Pirate book, not that into. Just a whole bunch of other stuff. I've got a bunch of John Green books. Young adult books that I've bought mostly for my students and realized they're kind of a little bit too old for the students I teach. I'm not going to read them, which is really unfortunate because I'm super into his podcast. I think it's called Anthropocene. Love it. Great podcast. You should definitely give it a listen. I'll set up a link down below. But yeah, no, I think he wrote also The Fault in Our Stars. I think that's what it's called. Anyway, it was an okay movie, but you know what? I'm not really interested in that genre of book. I don't So no, those are going. Bunch of other books I just DNF'd. Ricci's Origin of the Species. I think I remember that being a big thing at one point. No, not into it. Didn't work out for me. Yeah, a bunch of other stuff that I just DNF'd, not going. I had Cheryl Strayed's Wild. I did read this, not this year. I read it years ago, and somehow it just ended up being left on my bookshelf. I need to make room. It's an awesome book. If you haven't read it, you really should. It's super great, but no, like it needs to go. Bunch of other stuff. Let me just see. John Irving, Son of Circus. I love circuses and carnivals and all those things. Like, I'm super into them. So, pretty much anytime I see a book about the circus or a carnival or something, I'm gonna buy it. But, oh my goodness, I think I made it to page 155 here when I DNF'd. I was like, it's not working out for me. I'll probably get back to it. Never got back to it. So, why am I hanging on to it? Life is too short, not doing it. This book I've had literally for decades. I have hauled it around on so many of my moves. I bet that this was very timely. Back in, let's see if we can find the publication date. Yeah, back in 1995 when it was written. I bet this was like, it was very timely. And if I had ever gotten around to reading it, I bet I could have learned a lot. But our world has changed a lot since 1995. A lot of stuff has happened since then. Yeah, so a lot of things that he was really talking about have come to fruition. I don't really need to read this now. It's kind of out of date. Don't know why I still have it done. Again, that's why culling your books and making time and room for them is so important. What else do I have? Oh, just so much stuff. Neil Gaiman, Ocean at the End of the Lane. I tell you, everybody loves this book. I am giving up on Neil Gaiman. I've tried so many times. I love stuff like I hear his interviews and the things he says about writing. I really enjoy. He just seems like a really intelligent, thoughtful person. But every time I read something by Neil Gaiman, all I think is, why am I reading the first draft of someone's novel? Like, why has this not been edited? I can't do it. So no more Neil Gaiman. Um, so I don't even know. I do not know how many books I have culled here. I'll count them up and I'll leave it in the notes below. But yeah, it's an entire box of books that are just are going down with me, and I feel good about that. I still have a lot of books I need to get around to reading. Um, So I'm not sure. I'm still in the process of making a plan for how I'm going to get through more books. I did find, like I said, a stack. I'm going to talk about that in the next video. That is very promising. So, anyway, but this is my culled box of books that I'm going to take to my favorite bookstore. I will also put a link to that bookstore in the notes below in case you happen to live nearby. And I'm sure if you do live nearby, you probably are going to go visit him, but you never know. People travel, right? And they go places, and you're in a new city, and what's the first thing you want to do? If you're me, you want to go find like the best bookstores, right? So I'll put a little link to that below as well. All right, so that was the first part of this little project.